So, hi everyone. My name is Diane Kukul, as Chris mentioned, and I'll be presenting a high-level look at the Draft Order 4.0 requirements for irrigation and nutrient management associated with the groundwater protection parts of the order. All right, as an introduction, I'll be covering four main topics. And those topics are groundwater phase areas, targets and limits and time schedules, monitoring and reporting, and third parties. Starting with the groundwater phasing. So we acknowledge that expecting growers to comply with all of the requirements that are included in this order as soon as the order goes into effect would be extremely difficult. So for some requirements, we are allowing the phasing in of the compliance actions. Eventually, all growers must comply with all requirements, but your ranch location within a groundwater phase area will allow you to begin your compliance on a staggered schedule. And that staggered schedule is based on your ranch location. So we have defined 3 groundwater phase areas in our region. And you can see on the figure, those areas are represented by the dark black, the medium tone gray, and then essentially everywhere else. The groundwater phase 1 areas are our highest priority areas. And within our region, these phase 1 areas are a portion of the Gilroy-Hollister Valley groundwater basin, portions of the Forebay and Upper Valley aquifer subbasins, a portion of the Santa Maria groundwater basin, and the Santa Ynez River Valley groundwater basin. If your ranch is in a phase 1 area, you must comply with specific requirements before ranches in the groundwater phase 2 areas, and so on. So we will indicate your groundwater phase area on your ENOI, your electronic notice of intent, so that you don't have to guess at it. And I also refer you to table B-1 in the order to see how we have geographically defined all 3 of the groundwater phase areas. My next topic focuses on the quantifiable milestones that Chris referred to, and these are the ones that are required for the groundwater protection. These milestones are the fertilizer application limits and the targets and limits for nitrogen discharged to groundwater. Regarding the first milestones, the fertilizer application limit's purpose is to reduce the over-application of fertilizer on crops. All ranches must comply with this requirement starting in 2022. This is not one of the phased-in requirements. So based on information provided to us from the total nitrogen applied reports that we've been receiving since 2014, these are the 6 most frequently reported crops in our region. And the order establishes the values as the fertilizer application limits for these crops. These numbers are based on grower-provided information as well as research-based guidelines and scientific literature. The units for these application limits are pounds of nitrogen per crop acre. For all other crops in the region, the order establishes the fertilizer application limit of 500 pounds of nitrogen per acre. Moving on to the second quantifiable milestone, when I talk about the discharge targets and limits, the discharge I'm referring to is the difference between all of the nitrogen that's applied to a ranch and all of the nitrogen that's removed from the ranch. This excess nitrogen that remains in the system is what is available to be discharged to groundwater. And this is the basis for the A-R metric that's discussed throughout the order, the MRP, and attachment A. These targets and limits apply to all ranches, and they represent the sum total of nitrogen available to be discharged to groundwater from all of the crops together grown on the ranch within the year. The units are pounds of nitrogen per ranch acre. For the first few years the order is in effect, growers must achieve these discharge targets, which are not enforceable, as was already mentioned. Then, beginning in 2026, growers must comply with these discharge limits, which are enforceable. As you can see on this table, we're using a stepwise approach to reduce the amount of nitrogen that's available to be discharged to groundwater over about a 30-year period. And we're doing this to allow growers time to adjust their management practices to better balance the A-R metric. So regarding compliance, I encourage you to take a look at the MRP and Attachment A to see how we expect you to comply with these discharge targets and limits, because we do provide two compliance pathways. One pathway is based on the A-R values being equal to the targets and limits that you see on the table, and in according with that time schedule noted on the table. The other pathway could apply to growers with high concentrations of nitrogen in their irrigation water. In this case, a grower would comply by using the nitrogen in their irrigation water for their crops, and then making sure that their nitrogen removed meets or exceeds the amount of any additional nitrogen that's applied via fertilizer or compost. Next, I'll be talking about monitoring and reporting requirements for 4 components associated with groundwater protection. And these components are irrigation and nutrient management, on-farm domestic wells, irrigation wells, and groundwater quality trend determinations. So for irrigation and nutrient management, upon adoption of the order, all ranches must begin the monitoring of total nitrogen applied and an estimate of the irrigation water volume applied to the entire ranch over the reporting period, which is a year. When you are required to actually report this information, however, is based on your groundwater phase area. So also phased in over the first 6 years the order is in effect, so based on your groundwater phase area again, ranches must monitor and begin to report total nitrogen removed and measurements of irrigation water needs at the crop and the ranch level, in addition to total nitrogen applied. By 2027, all ranches in all groundwater phase areas will be required to begin this reporting, will be required to be reporting all of this information. And I'd like to say a little bit more about the irrigation water information that's required. The point of requiring this information is to determine if irrigation water is being over-applied, because the over-application can result in increased nitrogen discharge to surface water, as well as increased nitrogen leaching below the crop root zone. So to determine if over-application is occurring, growers are required to calculate a crop-specific evapotranspiration, or ET, and are required to monitor the volume of irrigation water applied at the ranch and the crop level. So moving on, all ranches are required to begin domestic well sampling the same year the order goes into effect. So there is no phasing in associated with complying with this part of the requirements. Sampling and reporting must occur on an annual basis, and the samples must be analyzed for these constituents. You may notice that 1,2,3 TCP has been added to the monitoring constituents that you are already familiar with from previous orders. All ranches are also required to conduct monitoring and reporting of their irrigation wells, and the monitoring results are incorporated into each ranch's irrigation and nutrient management planning and reporting. When, due to the groundwater phase area that you are in, a grower is required to begin reporting only their total nitrogen applied, then they need to sample only their primary irrigation well. Then, based on your groundwater phase area, when the more expanded A-R reporting requirements kick in, and a grower is required to begin reporting total nitrogen applied as well as total nitrogen removed and irrigation water information, then the grower must sample all of the irrigation wells and calculate a weighted average nitrogen concentration and irrigation volume applied to the ranch for the reporting year. Lastly, the irrigation wells sampling and reporting must also occur on an annual basis, similar to the domestic well sampling and reporting. In conducting monitoring and reporting for groundwater quality trend determination, growers are required to first develop a trend monitoring plan in which the well network used to establish groundwater quality trends is defined. Wells in that network must be sampled and the lab results reported to GeoTracker, and a trend evaluation report must be provided to the Water Board. So lastly, I'm going to say a little bit about third parties, also referred to as cooperatives and coalitions in the order. As Chris mentioned, we fully support formation of third parties to assist growers, and we encourage growers to consider joining a third party to help them navigate the groundwater protection requirements of the order. So with respect to groundwater, there are two areas in which a third party can help growers. The first is with the groundwater quality monitoring and reporting associated with the domestic and irrigation wells. The second area a third party can help is with the groundwater quality trend determination. Specifically, a third party can develop and implement the trend monitoring plan and can conduct the trend evaluation itself and provide us with the reporting. And that concludes the groundwater protection portion of the workshop, and I'm happy to entertain any questions you might have.